Hello and welcome, everyone. It's nice to be here with you today, and thank you very much for joining. As you probably know, at this webinar today, we're going to talk about teaching more with less, or how less can sometimes be even more efficient when it comes to teaching English, and how both students and teachers can benefit from having fewer but more efficient tasks during the lesson. Before we start, let me introduce myself. My name is Marta Terhovska, and I'm an English teacher at Lincoln ESL Schools Network and Talking Cloud. And today we're going to work together. So one more time, hello to all of those who are still joining us, and please feel free to be active in chat. Right now, you can write hello and your name and the name of the city you're watching this webinar from. But during the session, we're going to have some tasks, some questions. So please, I do encourage you to participate actively. And if you have any questions, or if you hear something that sounds similar to what you have already experienced as a teacher, feel free to share it with us in our chat. So before we start with our actual topic, we're going to have a little moment. We're going to talk a bit about the company of Talking Cloud, the platforms that help us organize this event today. And I'm going to switch for those few moments into Ukrainian, but later on we're going to continue in English. So, Talking Cloud. Talking Cloud is a platform, or so-called all-inclusive, for teaching English. І спочатку розповімо про основні аспекти Talking Cloud. Перш за все, йдеться про бібліотеку інтерактивних підручників, також систему менеджменту навчального процесу, або по-іншому Learning Management System, та Академію розвитку мовних шкіл. Зараз ми пройдемося детально по основних аспектах. Отже, якщо йдеться про бібліотеку інтерактивних підручників, то ми маємо аж 50 інтерактивних цифрових підручників для різних рівнів, починаючи від Pre-A1 і аж до C1, для різних вікових категорій. Це і школярів початкових класів, і підлітки, і також навіть дорослі. Окрім підручників з інтерактивними завданнями, з автоматичним фідбеком, з перевіркою правильних відповідей та можливістю створювати завдання різних типів та редагувати їх. Також є ще Teacher's Guide, тобто деталізовані плани занять для кожного підручника, в яких ви знайдете не лише procedures, тобто те, як організувати кожну з активностей, коротко прописані інструкції, follow-up questions та все, що може бути необхідним в підготовці для уроку, а й також лінки на різноманітні гейміфіковані варіанти завдань, активностей для того, аби навчання було цікавим не лише вчителям, а також дітям або ж старшим учням. Окрім Teacher's Guide, бібліотека інтерактивних підручників включає в себе також трекер прогресу учнів, тобто як тільки учні виконують завдання, будемо бачити їхню і правильність, і повноту виконання, і зможемо відповідно надати хороший, якісний фідбек. Окрім цього, пропонуємо систему тестів автоматизованою перевіркою до кожного підручника, а також плейсмент-тест, зокрема для новеньких учнів, які тільки розпочинають навчання з вами. Окрім цього, є бібліотека інтерактивних worksheets і можливість створювати самостійно ці інтерактивні worksheets або редагуючи вже існуючі завдання, або ж створюючи самостійно, переробляючи в різноманітних форматах. Окрім бібліотеки інтерактивних підручників, як вже сказано, є ще Learning Management System, тобто система менеджменту навчального процесу, що робить навчальний процес зручним, а головне ефективним як для окремих вчителів і репетиторів, так і для цілих мовних шкіл. Починаючи з створення профілів учнів, з якими можна проводити індивідуальні заняття, так і до об'єднання цих профілів у групи, і генерування розкладу уроків з індивідуальними учнями чи з групами, з прикріпленням різноманітних тестів, зокрема з одного тесту з автоматизованим вивченням рівня англійської, також з можливістю створення розкладу роботи як для вчителя, так і для окремих груп, з можливістю ведення електронного журналу, відзначенням відсутності, також можливістю прикріплювати домашні завдання або завдання для підготовки до наступного уроку та надавання зворотнього зв'язку від вчителя учням за допомогою коротких коментарів. Також з допомогою цієї LMS можливий зручний перехід на онлайн-заняття, якщо раптом є така потреба, і прогрес виконання завдань в інтерактивних підручниках можна також відслідковувати з допомогою цієї LMS, разом із автоматизованою перевіркою як і завдань, так і цілих тестів. Це ми коротко пройшлись по основних аспектах, і зараз які ж можливості з такого використання платформи Talking Cloud надає як керівникам, засновникам та менеджерам мовних шкіл, так і окремим вчителям та репетиторам. Отже, перш за все, найбільш очевидний варіант це налагодження навчальних процесів та контроль над менеджерською рутиною. Це дозволяє також не лише організовувати навчання онлайн, а також залучати змішаний формат або ж цілком навіть офлайн навчання, просто воно буде систематизоване та зручніше. Також це однозначно економить ресурси на пошуки та розробку програми, допомагає стандартизувати якості послуг і також є сучасною моделлю викладання. Для вчителів та репетиторів, які працюють чи з індивідуальними групами, з групами з учнями, чи з групами учнів, це допомагає економити час на підготовку до занять, економити час на перевірку тестів та різноманітних завдань, та контролювати як своє навантаження, так і загалом грамотно управляти часом в роботі з учнями чи з групами учнів. А також бути flexible та адаптуватися під потреби. Це ми коротко щойно прийшли з по організаційних питаннях, і ще лише одне єдине яке зазвичай останнє запитання, яке зазвичай є у вчителів або ж учасників наших вебінарів стосовно сертифікатів про проходження цього вебінару. Отже, для того, аби отримати сертифікати про проходження цього вебінару, достатньо перевірити лист на пошті та здійснити оплату. Для підтвердження оплати, будь ласка, надсилайте скрін квитанції на лист, і протягом 24 годин після проходження вебінару всі, хто сплатили, отримують на свої скриньки тести, і в разі виконання їх на 80% та вище зможуть отримати доступ до фінального тестування, зможуть отримати сертифікат про проходження. Також не переймайтеся, якщо раптом тести надсилаються не одразу після завершення вебінару, протягом доби ви можете їх отримати. Сподіваюся, що в разі активної участі сьогодні, активного слухання сьогоднішнього вебінару, навіть після першого разу у вас будуть відмінні результати. So that was, I guess, the last question before we actually moved on to our topic. And I suggest that we start with a little task. And by the way, thank you very much for being so active in our chat. I do see that we've got a lot of people from different cities, and I'm really glad to see all of your messages there. Please continue being active. Right now, we're going to start with a little question. So I do have a few statements on my screen. Right now, I'd like you to look at them and to write down in chat the number of those statements if you have ever had any of these thoughts during your teaching career. You may think that some of them are still true, or you might just remember thinking of these things while you were just beginning your teaching career. But in any case, please choose a number of the ones that you think you ever had and put them in a chat. Meanwhile, I'm going to read them out for you. So the first one is, the more aspects of English we focus on in one lesson, the more effective it will be. Number two, I should prepare a lot of materials for each lesson to make the learning process more effective and interesting. Number three, I want my students to learn as many new words as possible. I know they might forget some of them, but the more I teach, the more they will learn. And finally, number four, an effective teacher spends rather much time preparing for the lesson. If you agree or thought the same, like as some of these statements, like 2 or 3 of them, please put down all of the numbers in the chat. All right, I see number 2, number 4. Okay. Personally, I used to think that number 3 is a good one. So yes, I thought that like we need to teach as many as possible, like new vocabulary items, new topics, and even if the students don't get it all yet, they will have some knowledge. Maybe they don't reach the highest aim, but at least they will know something. Well, at least it was number 3 for me. Okay, I see number 4. Yes, number 4 is also quite popular here. Okay, thank you very much for sharing. And today we are not going to talk about whether these statements are wrong or bad. No, we're going to talk about the things that are opposite to it, but yet can be more effective sometimes and more efficient when it comes to teaching English. So, without spending too much time preparing or without trying to cover all of the possible topics or as many words as possible, have to yet be efficient and create great lessons for our students. So, trying to do less, but to actually teach more. And we're going to start with one more thing. I'm going to show you a few lessons, a few examples, and I'd like you to think which of these lessons might be, let's say, not the most effective, but more effective. Okay, so let's have a look at the first lesson here. You do have a lesson which focuses on reading, grammar, and vocabulary. The main aim of this lesson is that the students develop their sub-skills of reading for gist and for details, are able to use present perfect for life experiences, and are able to use new vocabulary. The sub-aims are to introduce the students to the new vocabulary, block in vocabulary, and to practice oral fluency and to practice writing skills. That was lesson number one. Now we're going to have a look at lesson number two. This one is focused only on reading. The main aims are to develop the sub skills of reading for gist and details in the context of memorable things. And the sub aim is to introduce students the new vocabulary, so block in vocabulary, and to practice oral fluency. Please right now in chat, write down the number of the lesson that you think is more effective. And well, shortly, why? Waiting for your answers in chat. All right, I see numbers. Number two, but oh, number two only. Okay, why? All right, we do have number one as well. So to be honest, yeah, I do agree with those who put number two in chat. I'm not saying that lesson number one is a bad one. Sometimes I do believe that it's possible to still make this lesson efficient and for students to benefit a lot from this one. But in the majority of cases, I would probably opt for a lesson two. Let's analyze what makes them different, apart from the obvious size of description, but let's have a look at some details. We do have lesson one, and the lesson focus on the whole of three things. We do have reading, grammar, and vocabulary in one lesson. Of course, we don't know the timing of the lesson yet. We do have like lessons that last for 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and lessons that last for an hour and a half, right? But in most cases, I would probably choose either one lesson focus or, well, maybe two, but more than two most probably will be a bit too much for students and, well, to be honest, for teachers as well. When it comes to the main aim, we do have lesson number one with, first and foremost, reading of the types, then grammar, and also the new vocabulary, which may be, well, not connected to grammar, who knows. And as a sub-aim, we do have a very useful block and vocabulary introduction, but also we do have oral fluency and writing skills, which again may take a lot of time each. And well, I guess it will be a little bit difficult to combine it all in one lesson so that it's logically connected. Right now, we were looking and analyzing the differences between the two lessons, and we were focusing on three important things. We were talking about lesson focus, we were talking about main aim and sub-aim. Before we move on to the further parts of the webinar, let's analyze like those three things and what makes them difficult, what makes them different, and what makes them so important to English teachers. Why do we start with those things? We start with lesson focus, the main aim and the sub aim of the lesson, because this is technically something the teachers need to start with when they are planning a new lesson. When you have a new student or when you have a group of students, whatever, when you plan a lesson, this is something that you should pay attention to, I guess, first and foremost. Why do you teach this lesson? What do you want to teach with that? What do you want your students to be able to do at the end of it? So when it comes to lesson phase, it's usually a particular skill or language system which will be primarily worked on in a lesson. When it comes to skills, we are talking about reading, listening, speaking, and writing. And when it comes to language systems, we are talking about either vocabulary, grammar, or functional language. And normally we would have a lesson which is called either one lesson focus or maybe like two. But again, as I said before, two and more, that's already risky, especially when we're talking about lessons are that last less than an hour. Then, when it comes to the main aim, we usually mean something which is the most important thing that we want our students to achieve in the lesson. Usually, we will have it as by the end of the lesson, students will be able to do something or will have improved this or that skill. And for example, as we had it in the previous slide, if it's a reading lesson, then students will have improved their reading skills like reading pages and reading for details, for example. And of course, apart from the main aim, we may have some subsidiary aims or sub aims, but it's very important so that these aims are not sub aims are not random. For example, let's have reading and a bit of speaking. No, sub aims are language or skills that the learners must be able to use well in order to achieve the main aim of the lesson. Let's say, for example, when it comes to reading, um, they are, for example, working on some text. They are doing some tasks like true false activity or matching or anything else, which is included in reading. But then they also, for example, have a little discussion about the text, follow-up task after reading, or for instance, later on they have a debate based on something that they read in the text. So it should be definitely connected to the main aim as well. When it comes, for example, to the grammar lesson, let's say, they may have a new grammar presented in a text so that they will have to do some reading before they actually learn the grammar rules. Again, as we can see, the main aim will be for them to learn new grammar and to be able to use it in the context. But the sub aim for this one would be reading because they will have to work with the text and they will have to find this grammar in text or they will have to discuss this text for a little bit, but again, it will be connected to the main purpose as well. So now that we know all about lesson focus, the main aim and the sub-aim of the lesson, it's very important right now while having a lesson to have this in mind and not to forget about it. Because sometimes it happens that you start a lesson, you have it planned, you do have the main focus, for example, on vocabulary, you have the main aim of students to be able to use the words in context, and you may have like a sub aim, for example, for them to speak better, to improve their fluency. But it happens that the student makes a mistake. This is that of a grammar type, for example, or of like any other type. And the teacher feels that they need to somehow respond to this mistake. And as a result, the lesson continues, but in their own direction. The students still learn something, but not the things that the teacher initially planned. So right now, I suggest that we'll have a look at one type of this lesson, and I'd like you to help me with the best strategy that we can use in this exact situation, so that it's both effective and effective for both teachers and students. So the situation is of this way: we do have a nice lesson, a reading lesson, with a clear main aim to develop students' sub skills of reading for just and details in the context of traveling. And the sub aim is to introduce students to some block and vocabulary in this text. Sounds nice and logical. But all of a sudden, the student makes grammar mistakes, for example, while using past simple or present perfect. And this is something that the students have already learned. So, well, that's logical. The teacher expects them to know these tenses and to use them well. I do have three options for you. Please be ready and write the letter in chat, A, B, or C. Option A. The teacher can stop there and provide some consistent grammar work revising the topic. I mean, how to use past simple and present perfect in sentences. Option B, a teacher can provide a quick delay error correction after students complete the task. And option C, teacher just ignores the mistakes as it's not the focus of the lesson. Please write down your answer in the chat. A, B, or C. If you think that two options are okay, you may write two letters in chat. All right, looks like we're unanimous here. I do see a lot of these, and actually, that's something that I would probably opt for. Um, but I do remember some lessons when I myself stopped and provide some consistent grammar work, revising the topic. It wasn't like super productive, and I wouldn't say that it was super beneficial for students. But yes, I do recall something like that happening in some of my lessons a few years ago. Because that's something that I guess a lot of teachers would naturally want to do because they feel like, oh, we've already learned something. I've already told this topic to them. Why are they making this mistake again? Right. Um, what about ignoring and why it's not the best option? So, yes, some of the mistakes can be ignored, but if it's something that the students have already learned, if it's something of their level, and if it's something which is your fossilized mistake or the mistakes that gets repeated by a lot of student members, maybe the best idea would be definitely to provide this delayed error correction. Maybe it wouldn't be a long activity. It wouldn't be a time-consuming task. It would be short, but yet it will attract students' attention to this topic. At least that they need to remember this one. And I would personally probably note it down that maybe when we're going to have a revision lesson later on, or if I am not teaching a course, but I'm teaching like individual lessons, maybe I would probably think of creating some activities so that we do recycle this topic later on. So yeah, probably be his best one here. Uh, Delayed error correction and a slight note from me to note it down somewhere so that you come back to this topic later on when you have time, when you are planning the next lesson or the revision lesson for this unit. All right, and right now we're going to have a look at a few tips on how to think of lesson focus and main aim and sub aim and how to choose the right ones for your lessons. So first and foremost, um, something that a lot of people suggest is to choose a narrow primary focus of the lesson. As you've already learned, it happens quite a lot that we do have some spontaneous things like students making mistakes and us needing to get back and to provide this delayed error correction and to already have some extra time spent with that. So the primary focus that is narrow, it gives you this opportunity, this time, a bit of extra time during the lesson to actually comment on some mistakes that may occur. When you initially plan like three focuses or like a lot of sub aims, a lot of main aims, and kind of it doesn't allow you to have this time for something extra that may, and usually as practice shows, it occurs during the lessons. Students have some extra questions that they are making some mistakes that needs to be uh, somehow like reacted to. And as a result, if you have a narrow primary focus, you do have a chance to respond to students' needs. Then the next step is to have specific and realistic aims. For instance, again, if you're talking about a 45-minute lesson or an hour lesson, and you're planning to cover both reading for gist, for details, to have the new vocabulary, to practice the new vocabulary in context, to have a bit of speaking, and finally to write a story about it, well, most probably you wouldn't have time for all of that, or you would make time for all of that, but for the sake of like shortening the tasks and not paying enough attention or not finishing the task or having to like simplify them during the lesson. Again, probably not worth it. So realistic aims while planning the lesson, I guess, will be one of the main tips here. Then, why it's so important that we think of focus of the lesson and lesson aim and sub aim first, because while creating activities, while making a list of activities that you're going to have for this set lesson, it's important to understand and to remember that every activity should lead to the achievement of the main aim. For example, if the main aim is for students to write an essay at the end of the lesson, you should make sure that all of the activities that they are doing during the lesson will lead them to being able to write an essay at the very end. For example, you start with discussing like the topic of your essay first in groups, and you're going to move on to reading an actual essay written by someone else. You're going to analyze the structure. You're going to practice with the language, whatever. And only then the students will draft, will analyze it in groups, and finally will create their own essay at the very end. So each of these activities was kind of a next step so that the students reach their final main aim at the very end. They will be able to write this essay on their own. If any of them is skipped, or if, for example, they're in the wrong order, or if you start doing something else on your way, the final aim, the main aim, will not be achieved. So again, while finishing your lesson plan, it's a good idea to look through and make sure that all of these activities are logical and connected to the main aim. The final one here is not to extend the focus in the process of the lesson, which is again very tempting, sometimes feels like super needed, but usually ends up in you not being able to finish in time or not being able to finish the way you wanted with students completing the final task successfully. And you have an easier to shorten or to simplify or to create something on the spot. Uh, Improvisation is nice. Spontaneous decisions are sometimes good, but I do believe that when it comes to teaching, it's a combination of both being able to plan nicely and being able to sometimes spontaneously adjust it so that it suits the lesson and the students better. But again, a combination of planning and improvisation, only a combo. So we talked about the main things to remember, and now we're going to talk about three methods on how to uh, teach more of this less. We're going to start with something called extension. And I do have a controversial question for you. So we do have two situations here, and I'd like you to think of which one you personally would choose as a teacher. We do have A, to have more tasks in a lesson with less time spent on each of them, and B, to have fewer tasks in a lesson with more time spent on each of them. Please write your choice in the chat. So either A or B. Right, waiting for a few more of your answers here. All right. Yeah, that's actually good. I see both of them. Well, a lot of bees, of course, which is kind of logical, uh, since our topic today is teaching more of us less. But yeah, I do agree with people, yeah, saying that it depends. It actually depends a lot on your student, on the type of lesson, and on the group of students that you're teaching. For example, let's imagine that you're having a lot of, like a group of, let's say, 15 or 20 students of primary school. Would they be fine with fewer tasks and more time spent on each of them? Um, Not really. When it comes to this age group, it's definitely better to have more tasks in a lesson with like smaller time limit, let's say 2, 3 minutes, 5 minutes on each of them. So again, it depends. But in the majority of cases, when it comes to older students who can concentrate longer, yes, option B is a better one, especially if you talk about like older students and more proficient students. And yeah, today we are going to mostly focus on how to make those fewer tasks in a lesson more efficient. So we do start with something called extension and on how to organize it during the lesson. So first we do start with a definition. An extension task, and you can guess it by the name of it, is an additional activity which is based on another task in a lesson which you have already completed with your students and which correlates with the main aim of the lesson. So they are often focused on a higher order thinking skills, like analyzing, evaluating, creating, and problem solving. And let's say, for example, that you started with a simple task of like unscrambling the words or reading the text or discussing some questions together. And then you're going to create another task based on something that they have already finished so that it's a logical continuation of that one, but it should be a bit more challenging, a bit more, um, it should require higher order thinking skills. I'm going to give an example right now. And this is a simple task, a vocabulary task that you can actually find in one of our books on Talking Cloud platform. Um, if you try to look for steps 21, 22, minutes 101, you would see it there. So it's just a part of the task, of course. There are only the first pictures here, but you can guess that it's a simple one where students have to match the words with the pictures. And then like you can check if all of the answers are correct. And instead of moving straight to the next task, there are a few ways in which you can extend this activity so that the students get 100% out of it. So that they both memorize the vocabulary better and memorize the vocabulary in, let's say, in a deeper way. So that it's not only the word in translation or the word in the picture, but so that they do not forget it in the long term. Maybe any ideas on how to extend this task, on how to use it one more time, but for a different activity, for a different instruction. I'm going to show you right now three, I guess, quite popular ways or most logical, most obvious ones. But if you have any more ideas, please feel free to write them in chat. So we're going to start with something quite simple. Um, if the students are ready with this activity, or if you have past finishers who are ready with this activity while the others are still working, there is an option of asking students to put a text next to the pictures and words which describe their personality, like to associate the words with them, or to compare the answers with their partner and then to find out if they have anything in common. Then there is also an option where they can choose the personality traits what they think are the most important for a good friend, for example, and then to explain why they think so. Here you can already see that this task requires not only analyzing like the words, the connection of these words, uh, the emotions behind these words and anything, but also like to explain to your reasons their choices. And the third option here is for students to describe someone using the word from task number one. But for example, not to say their name and let the others guess. It may be a group mate, it may be a famous person, but again, the instruction should be quite clear for students to be able to do it. Maybe an example from a teacher will work well. But yes, this will be a great extension activity for this one. I do see the idea of finding someone who in your group who is, yeah, so technically a similar idea, but a little bit different form. Okay, maybe someone else can think of some other options, so please feel free to leave them in chat. If you want to, the benefits of extending the tasks. So these are the most obvious ones, like having different types of practice and the meaningful practice. So when it comes to just matching, as we had it in the example, yes, the students can do it, but again, the chances of students forgetting these words in a few days, if they just match, and that's all vocabulary practice they got, are quite high. But if they associate the words with some people, for example, or if they think whether it's a good one or a bad one, or if they compare with their partner and if they describe someone and someone will guess, I guess it will mean more to them. The words will be emotionally colored for them and they will memorize them better. Well, at least they will say the words for a few more times than if they just have to match. Then the second benefit is to fill some extra time. For instance, usually associated with fast finishers, if you have students who have finished the activity while the others haven't yet, that's a great idea to come up with this extension task, just in case you will have students like that, so that they have have some activity to work on while they're waiting for the others. It may be super like super useful when it comes to mixed ability classes. And of course, with experience, you might be able to come up with something like that on the spot. For instance, like make a sentence with the word, or make a banana sentence. It's like a sentence where the student needs to use the target language, the word, for example, let's say an adjective, or like any vocabulary items that they learned for today. But they will have to substitute it for the word banana, and then the others will have to guess the word. It may be done in groups. It may be done if you have an individual student. The student is making and you're guessing, is making sentences and you're guessing, or vice versa. But I guess the first use is for fast finishers who have finished the activity while they're waiting for others. They may have a chance to work on this extension task. Um, so you may come up with it on the spot, but it's always a good idea to create something like this while you're planning the lesson, just to have it written somewhere. For example, a matching task, but those who finish faster may do this or that. For example, may write three sentences using these words, or may create a little story of them, or something else. So, like to think of a type of extensions that you may use for this as activity. Then the other benefit, which is also important, is that it kind of helps to personalize the material and to make this vocabulary uh, like closer, more relevant to students. If they see that they can use it in real world and they can associate it with something that they already know, that's a great plus for them to memorize this word better. And finally, it helps you prepare for your materials. You don't have to create a separate task for it. You don't have to create like a separate worksheet or print out. Usually, these tasks do not require you to do like any extra, to prepare any extra materials, but to use the access that you already have and to extend it, usually with some extra instruction, and that's it, like a piece of paper for them to write down the ideas or answers. So, like a great benefit, isn't it? And a few tips on how to extend the activity so that it's efficient and logical. First and foremost, to plan it in advance. As I said, sometimes it's possible to come up with these extension activities on the spot. Like you are having a lesson, you see a student who finished earlier, and you remember that in the past you did try this that activity, like find someone who, or a banana sentence, and you may think of it on the spot, but it's not always it's not always that you can like create a successful activity like that. Especially, for example, in a lesson, some student needs some extra explanation, and you're helping them, or you're micro teaching, or you're managing some situation with another pair. So it's a good idea to plan it in advance and to have it pre-written somewhere so that you can easily use it while teaching. The next one is that the aim of each extended task should correlate with the main aim. Again, remember that it was a vocabulary lesson, so they did the matching. You check their understanding of these words, and the next activity should also help them to be able to use this vocabulary better. For example, it can be creating sentences, it can be creating a quiz based on these words, it can be drawing the words and the other partner like trying to guess the word. But again, it should correlate with the main aim. If the main aim is to learn the vocabulary to like for students to be able to use it in context, then perfect. The other important thing here, and something that I personally find quite okay, it's not difficult, it's challenging to do during the lessons, is to make sure that you check the extension activities. For example, if you if you asked the fast finisher to do this activity, you cannot just skip the checking part and move on while the others finish the initial task. You will have to make time for it to be checked. Otherwise, the students will not be interested in doing it next time. Uh, yes, they will still benefit from the practice, but if not checked, if not corrected, or if not encouraged, if not praised, next time it won't be that successful. So every single time when you give an extension task, make sure that you checked it. And the final one, it's very important so that this extension task is slightly more challenging than the previous one. It cannot be simpler than the original task. For example, if you give the task to answer the question, the next one cannot be like to label the picture or to match the words. So uh, the extension task is always a little bit harder than the initial one. And we move with logical order. We start from the simple activities and we finish with the more difficult ones. That was about extension. And again, if you suddenly recall the cases where you successfully extended some of the activities, please feel free to uh, leave your stories in our chat. Meanwhile, we are moving on to the second way, which is recycling. And I do have two more statements for you. So this time I would like you to read them and to write whether you agree or disagree with the statement. For example, like one no, two yes, or one no, two no. So a number and agree or disagree. The first statement is if students have learned some new vocabulary and grammar once, they should be able to use it. And number two, if students don't use new vocabulary and grammar, they are just lazy. So please in chat the number of the statement and yes or no, which means that you either agree or disagree with it. Waiting for your answers, please. If you disagree with both, it's still okay. You can leave any answers in chat, please. Don't be afraid. All right. Yeah, I do see no's and for one yes. Okay. So even though it's a desirable result, I mean, for students to be able to remember everything that they learned once, yet it's rarely true. I mean, usually it takes a bit more than once for students to be able to remember and to use something that they learned in real life conversations. So yeah, even though we'd like for it to happen, usually they are not able to use something if they've heard about it only once. And yes, I do agree with the second no as well. Um, Sometimes, yes, sometimes students are lazy, but it does not always mean that if they don't use new vocabulary and grammar that they are definitely lazy. No, in most cases it means that they just haven't had enough practice and so that they are either not sure about how to use the new language or they don't remember how to use it or they just know the simpler way on how to use it and they will stick to it because they know that this one is definitely correct. So, or you haven't created for them a situation in which they need to use the new vocabulary or the new grammar or the new functional language. So, as a result, in most cases, it's not only about students' laziness, it's also about our lesson planning and creating the possibility and, well, the need for students to use this as that language, but also providing enough practice before we move on to the production stage. So, yeah, no and no for both of them. Um, right now, we're going to have a look at the method, at the way in which we can actually help our students to be able to use new vocabulary and grammar after they learn it once. And the thing is called recycling. In our today's context, recycling means revising and practicing the language systems, vocabulary or grammar of functional language, which students have learned before. So basically, when you have the next lesson, you don't start with a new topic. Like, yesterday we learned past simple, today we are learning present perfect. No, you start with students revising, revisiting the previous topic in Any other way, for example, in doing some exercises or in just recalling, like, what did we do last lesson? What do you remember about it? But in any ways, making students recall the previous topic, and only after you revise this one to move on to the new one. Um, right now, I'm going to show you the ways in which some vocabulary and grammar might be revised during class, might be recycled. But again, if you know any other ways, or if you in your teaching experience have had any cases that might help, that might be a good example, please feel free to um, leave it in the chat. So we start with vocabulary and a great activity of alias or charades. I guess it's favorite for a lot of teachers. Why? Well, because first of all, it's easy to organize. It's something that the students like. And thirdly, but I mean, last but not least, it's something that has a lot of different ways of being organized. The same charades may be done in different ways. You may have students writing the words on the cards and then explaining them to their group mates for them to guess, or students playing Who Am I game, or students drawing the words that they learned and the others trying to guess, or for example, the students miming or showing the word. So it can be done in different ways, but yet it's something that the students like. It's easy to organize, and it actually helps them to refresh their memory and to recall the vocabulary items that they had. A suggestion before you start with the actual charades, maybe to provide a minute or two for them to revise the vocabulary, to look at the word list that they had before, so that well, they recall the words first and only then to move on to the game itself. Otherwise, there is a chance that some students may struggle. The other option is to make a banana sentence, the activity that was already mentioned today, but something which is quite useful. The only thing is that when you introduce this activity for the first time, you need to be very clear with the instructions. Because if you do not provide a good example, or if you do not instruct them about the fact that banana sentence should be not very obvious, and it should be like preferably grammatically correct, and it should make sense, and it should be possible to guess the word by reading a banana sentence. So I guess if all of the instructions are followed and the students got the main idea and you provide a good example for it, then it might be quite successful when it comes to vocabulary recycling. Another activity, which again can be conducted in a few ways, is a circle story. So students having to use the words from the previous topic to create a story. One student writes one sentence, the other student has a word, either picks a word randomly or has the word assigned and creates the next sentence so that it continues the story that the previous student started. And it can be conducted either open class, on the board, on a piece of paper. If online, for example, it can be conducted using the Word documents when students have the right to edit, or by sharing the screen, or by working in separate breakout rooms, but yet having the access to the same document. So again, all of these activities are possible both online and offline. And the final one here being the longest sentence. Again, the students working with the vocabulary, recycling the vocabulary from the previous time and trying to use as many vocabulary items as possible. But again, the sentence should be logical and, well, grammatically correct. The idea is for students to use as many vocabulary items as possible and to make a good sentence, the longest sentence possible. You may make it a bit competitive by like asking students to like by comparing the students' results. For example, someone used 6 words, someone used 8 words, or you may, if you work with individual students, you may like suggest that you count the number and you see if you broke your own personal record. So maybe you have any other ideas, so please put them down in the chat. Again, a lot of other activities may be used for recycling vocabulary, but these are like the most popular ones or the easiest to conduct. When it comes to grammar, I also do have a few suggestions here. There is an example of jump if. When it comes to younger students, I guess they would really appreciate it. When it comes to older students, you may substitute the word jump into for stand if, or it's like stand up if, or for example, clap if, or raise your hand if, or you can suggest that students vote with the cards like yes or no. So again, the first part of it may be changed for something which suits the group better. But the idea is that you need to continue the sentence using the grammar that you learned previous time. For example, you learned past simple, and you make a sentence jump if you drank tea yesterday, or jump if you went to work on foot yesterday, whatever. You may suggest a few examples yourself, or if the students are stronger, you may ask them to write the sentences using the grammar structure you learned before. Um, the next one is when you provide the beginnings of the sentences and you ask students to continue about themselves. Again, they need to continue using either, well, the vocabulary is also an option here. Either the vocabulary that they learned before or the grammar constructions that they learned before. For example, like I've never been to, and they need to finish with either the place or they need to finish with the whole construction of the present perfect. And you can also encourage them to write their own options and to play it off in class so that their partners somehow like respond either with yes or no when they are reading out their sentences. Usually the students of, I guess, all group categories, age categories love it. And the final one, which does not require preparation at all, because I mean, for the previous two, you will have to provide some examples, or you will maybe have to start with a few sentences yourself. But this one, to truth and a lie, does not require any like preparation. You can conduct it like right on the spot with minimum or no materials. You will just have students to have a piece of paper to write their sentences, or when it comes to online lessons, you can ask them to write in chat. So they will have to create two true sentences and one false sentence by using only the vocabulary or the grammar that they learned on the previous lesson. Um, Again, if you have any other ideas on how to recycle grammar, you may put them down in the chat. We are moving on to some topics on how to recycle, and we're going to move on to the last part, to the last method. So when it comes to tips, the most obvious will be to do regular recycling, as it's a well-known fact that memory needs repetition, and if we do not repeat, if the students do not repeat the materials as they learned, usually up to 70-80% gets forgotten. So meaningful repetition and repetition in different ways in a variety of activities. For example, like fun activities, like we had some games or group activities, or some activities that they are definitely involved, like raise your hand if you, or jump if, right? In this case, the chances of them memorizing are much higher. So multiple exposures for like multiple exposures to the same structures are good for long-term memory, and long-term memory is something that we want our students to have when it comes to a language. So that their passive vocabulary, passive language can turn into active language. And of course, like to use different contexts so that not all of the tasks look the same. Even if you work with the same vocabulary, make it in different situations. Or, for example, if the previous lesson they were using the words to describe a personality, their own personality. Next lesson, they're describing, for example, their favorite movie character, or they're describing the persons they know. So that again, the language is the same, but the contexts are different, so that it's not too monotonous or boring for them. And let's go for the last one. But again, last but not least, we do have adaptation, and this is something I also have a situation for. I guess from time to time it happens to a lot of teachers, and I'd like to hear your ideas on what you would do in this situation. So the situation is as follows. Your students are supposed to read the text from the textbook. You're working with the textbook, there's text there, but the topic is completely not interesting to them. Like If it have never happened to you, if it has never happened to you, also put it down in the chat. But I do believe that something like this has happened to, if not all, then majority of teachers. So what would you do in this situation? If the students look obviously bored with the topic and it hasn't even started yet, or if you are getting ready for the lesson, you look at the text and you understand, oh no, like my students would definitely hate it. Or for example, if you have a topic and the student, for example, a few days ago, they mentioned, just not this one. I would hate it or something like that. So what would you do with this text from the textbook? Well, yes, I'm gonna provide some options for you. Find a similar topic. Okay, I do have some more ideas. Uh, we do have A, skip the text and do other activities instead. So if you choose A, please leave this letter in the chat. To ignore what your students say and ask them to do the task to improve their reading skills. That's option B. And option C is to try to adjust or change the task to make it more effective and to make it more interesting for students. So A, B, or C. Please leave your letter in chat. I see all three options. Okay. Skip the text. Okay. All right. I mean, well, all three options are technically possible, and I guess the teacher may opt for any of them. Yeah, but there are some disadvantages to some of them. If you just skip the text and do other activities instead, there is a chance that, well, if you use a course book, that some of the next activities may be somehow connected to the text, either like logically, or you will need some vocabulary from the text anyways, or you will have a discussion based on a text, and again, you will have to skip the whole lesson then. Um, if you look for any other activities, again, time consuming. If you have time and if you're ready to do it, yes. But again, we are thinking of how to teach more with less. So I guess not a perfect option for us today. If you just ignore what the students say and ask them to do the task to improve their reading skills, yes, you may talk to students, motivate them, explain that yet we'll have to read it and maybe you'll like it in the process. Might work for some, but it's again quite risky here, especially if you work with big groups of students or groups of students in general, teen students. In a lot of cases, you will risk having students who are already not interested in task and with little chance of them being interested later on. Uh, letter C um, is sounds like a good compromise. I mean, between both, as somebody said here, students and teachers, like an efficient option for both, right? Which requires a bit of your preparation so that the task is slightly modified for the students' needs and likes and interests. And also, like you're still using the material from the lesson from the book, which again has a high chance of being connected to the next activity. So again, skipping is not the best option unless, of course, you're redoing the whole lesson on the conditions that you have time for that. So that's when something called adaptation comes to work, which is technically adjusting the task to the level, needs, and interest of your students. And we're going to have a look at the things that we might adapt and the needs of the students and the reasons we might adapt the task for. I do have one more idea in the text, like prepare fun activities, fun exercises to the text yourself. Yes, I mean the text might be not the most interesting, but a fun exercise can compensate like it. Again, if you have any other ideas, feel free to leave them in chat. And meanwhile, we're going to look at some reasons for teachers to adapt. So first and foremost, something that comes to your mind when you hear the word adaptation is level of students. As mentioned, sometimes we might have either the groups of different, like not level, but different let's say, abilities. So some students might be quite good at writing, for example, but might struggle with listening tasks. Or some students might be all like B1 student, but the speaking activities is a disaster for them. So the whole course book may be of the level of the student, but you will have activities of different types, of different skills, of different language systems, and as a result, for some students, this activity might be difficult. Or if you have the whole group, for example, who struggle with like understanding the spoken English, let's say some of the British accents, and for them, like every authentic audio is a disaster. So, and if you see that you will have something like this in your lesson for the next time, maybe it's a good idea to adapt it a little bit so that uh, they do not struggle that much, or so that it's more comfortable for them to work with this audio. For example, you may think of slowing down the speed, or if you talk about the listening task, you may think of pausing the audio at some point, or suggesting the students work with the script. So again, adapting to the level of the students so that you can still use the lesson materials, but students actually feel comfortable working. The other things that you might think of is the interest of students. As it was said before, for instance, some of my students, if they only see the topic of like space or being eco-friendly or technology or something else, some students will definitely excited. For some students, is the most boring thing to talk ever. So if you know that, for instance, for your student or for your group, this topic is something that they are not interested in, it's a good idea to maybe not to change the text completely, but as it was suggested previously, like to add some fun task after it, or like to compromise to say that, we are going to read this text, for example, about the books that you don't like, or about the TV shows that you've never watched and you're not interested in. But later on, you either like have a little discussion why you don't like it, or for example, you may write your own piece of text or your own, let's say, like review on something that you like, which again will be similar to it. And you will have kind of an extended task here, but so that your student is actually interested and understands that, well, you thought about their interest as well. And lastly, we do have the needs of the students and their like different learning styles. Sometimes you will have to adapt to the context, to the theme. Sometimes you will have to support your students more. For example, by providing more examples, by providing some more visuals, by scaffolding, by providing extra instructions, by pre-teaching more. But yet again, that's somehow like connected to the level of students as well. Um, the important thing to remember here is to adapt in a way so that you are still focused on the main aim of the lesson and like yeah, to take into account the needs and the level of students and the interests, but to remember why you're teaching this topic and what you want your students to be able to do at the very end of it. So there is a risk of oversimplifying or like to putting the likes of students first and forgetting about the main idea, the main aim of the lesson. So it's important like to plan it in advance so that you don't forget it while conducting the lesson itself and trying to adapt in the process. So a few tips that might be helpful to be attentive to your students and to their needs. For example, one might say like, how should you know about your students' needs? It's important to listen to your students during like any lesson and actually English lessons. It's a unique way to learn more about your students because we do have a lot of questions about different topics, about different aspects of students' life. And I guess if teachers listen attentively, they may already know about the preferences of their students, their likes, dislikes, needs, and whatever um, after a few lessons only. So to be attentive to your students, to be attentive to their language needs, learning needs, and English level, and to know that, for example, if you have something like that in your books that might be challenging, might cause the struggles for students, to understand that you will have to slightly adapt it so that your students feel more comfortable, not too stressed, not too overwhelmed. Ask for feedback. So VSTRS provides a lot of feedback for our students. It's a good idea. For example, if you're not sure whether students like the task or whether students felt okay doing it or whether it was complicated for them, it's a good idea to ask for feedback. Like, how did you feel about this task? Was it easy or difficult for you to do it? What was difficult? And so on. And to let your students be creative and take part, you may suggest that they come up with an idea. Like, for example, what would you like our next task to be, or what do you think would be uh, a great like a great project on this topic or something like that. And sometimes students may provide you with even better ideas that you would personally think of. I just recalled my students having a project task, and one student did it in a way that I didn't expect it. We were talking about documentaries about nature, and he suggested that we created a documentary about their pets, and he actually created one. So yeah, sometimes students may be even more creative than us when it comes to thinking of some tasks. So that was the last step concerning adaptation. And right now, I'd like us to sum up with a little conclusion that sometimes we do have this desire to do a lot, to create as many tasks as possible, to teach as much as possible in one lesson. But it's important to remember that more, in a lot of cases, may cause confusion about the lesson, about its goals, and in general about English. Um, in a lot of cases, if you opt for more, it may mean just a surface level understanding without the ability for you to dig deeper and for students to memorize something long term, not just till the next time. And in a lot of cases, more means higher stress on students and it lowers students' engagement and they are cognitively overloaded. So it's a good idea to narrow our focus, but to think of extending, recycling, and adapting the tasks so that the students can take 100% of the out of the lesson. And the lesson is nice and beneficial for both students and teachers. So as our last moment of this webinar, I would like you to think of any of the strategies that you've heard of today, maybe any of the ideas that you would like to use during your next lesson, and to share them in a chat. So if you found something that you would like to use next time, please write about it. Thank you very much for your work today. Thank you very much for your comments in our chat. It was a pleasure to work with you. And the last reminder that those who are willing to get certificate, please check out your emails. There should be a message about the possibility of get one. Make sure after payment to send the screenshot on the same email, and good luck with your tests. I do believe that all of you will have a chance to get 80% plus after the first try. Thank you very much for being with us today.